if this commission were to allow permit process for pilot projects, that these following things that I'm going to ask you about should be required in New Mexico. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Require full disclosure about how the applicant would propose to dispose of all the residual concentrated waste.
From the pilot project.
Correct.
Yes.
Characterize the source fluids with specificity, including levels.
Please, and allow me, I'm just trying to be sure that I clearly understand. The source fluids meaning the water that was intended to be applied as part of the pilot project.
The produced water that was intended to be.
That is currently required under the Texas process as well.
And you would agree that that
yes.
would be fair to include here?
Yes.
A schematic of the treatment process.
Yes, I believe that would be fair.
In New Mexico?
Yep.
Characterization of the treated fluids and their consistency in quality, meaning all levels of constituents other than H2O.
I believe that would be fair. If I can clarify that, as I've stated earlier, we have developed lists. The New Mexico Consortium has what they refer to as their NPDES plus list, which is an extensive list. If we could limit it to that list, that would be great, because otherwise we're expanding to unknown processes that I would not know how to comply.
Where is that list?
That exists. You can get that through the New Mexico Produced Water Resource Consortium. It is referred to again as their NPDES plus list of constituents.
And you think that that's on their website?
It should be, or if not, you should be able to reach out to them for that. I believe that's somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 different constituents or analysis.
So you think that those 400 constituents that that the consortium has listed in the NPDES plus
yes,
should be required to be disclosed to NMED?
Yes.
And that is in terms of not only the fluids themselves, but all levels of constituents, correct?
That is correct. So that would be both. And when you say not only the fluids, what other constituents would we analyze for that list? It would have to be a liquid.
Sir, I don't know the answer to that, but okay. I'm just reading what it says on the Railroad Commission's site, and it says characterize the treated fluids and their constituency in quality. And then it says parentheses, levels of constituents other than H2O.
Okay. So if you will allow me to say that I would agree that that list should be analyzed for the raw incoming water, as well as the water that was intended to be applied via the pilot, I would agree to that statement.
And sir, just to be specific, you're talking about produced water, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Identify the constituents of concern.
Oh, I understand. That's where we're going here. So that would be up to NMED out of that particular list of constituents. Obviously, there's a lot of things in there to be concerned about. I would say there was a ranking. It's one constituent may not be as concernable as one over here that's extremely hazardous. So I would allow NMED to go with particular notice. We want to know these levels here.
A description, a full comprehensive description of the reuse scenario.
I think that's fair, yes.
A comprehensive description of the water treatment methodologies in parentheses, i.e. modalities, and how they will directly affect the reuse scenario.
I think that's fair.
And, you know, you were talking with a couple of other attorneys before, and I think that what you said is that in the pilot projects, you would favor full disclosure of constituents, but that the methodologies, the exact way, the instrumentalities, I'll call it, that still be allowed to be not disclosed.
So, if you'll allow me, I would advocate that the general description of that be allowed. Like I could come to you and say, this is a thermal treatment process that is going to recover a clean water vapor from this produced water, without going into it's going to have multi-stage eductors, size, this size, and all. That would be intellectual property, but I could give, our industry could give a general description of exactly what's going to occur in that treatment process. Right.
Now, what I noticed further on the Texas Railroad Commission site is that at any point, first of all, NMED for us would be able to deny an application. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And also that the NMED, like the Railroad Commission, could ask for further information.
Yes.
Could require limits on some parts of the application and allow the others.
Yes.
Could modify the request for a pilot project or the permit for a pilot project on any legitimate basis within the scope of these lists of things that we're discussing.
I believe that would be fair, as long as the regulatory body felt they had a declarative need, a scientific need, that we have a concern from this standpoint. We're not going to allow this. We have a concern until you can demonstrate that it can meet a limit. I would agree to that statement.
Back to the list itself. List any process and or treatment chemicals used at the facility that may be present in the produced water to be land applied. Include an estimate of the concentrations that may occur in the produced water to be land applied. Include material safety data sheets for each chemical.
They need to update their website. We don't call them MSDS any longer. And to be clear, they're not referencing any chemicals that may be in that water coming in. They're specifying what have you added during this treatment process. You need to disclose that. And if I understand that regulation correctly, yes, you do have to supply the safety data sheet with it, but there's nothing in that wording about trade secret information. You don't have to go into constituents. You have to disclose, we used hydrogen peroxide on the front end to oxidize and remove iron.
For instance, we had to use a certain chemistry as a flocculant to remove solids from the water prior to it going into this desal. That is information that they're going to want to disclose in that permit, along with the name of the product, safety data sheet with it, what was the concentration used in the treatment process. Provide a representative water quality analysis of the produced water and the treated produced water.
Yes.
Provide soil sampling in the application area to establish background soil chemistry to support viability of the present soil to support crop growth. Soil analysis should include sodium absorption ratios, soil pH, calcium, phosphorus, potassium, and magnesium.
And I apologize, I was gonna wait till the end to say yes, that I would agree with that rather than respond to each one of them.
Thank you. So what I want to say is that provision is basically to keep your company or oil and gas honest, right? Because you got to do a pre-soil analysis to determine what the constituents in that soil are, for instance, so that if it's all contaminated after, they can't say it was that way from that way before.
And I advocate that on many of the pilot projects, not only just in this space, but when I'm looking at perhaps a new chemical application in a hydraulic fracturing, I want to know results prior to us adding that, to where I'll know, did it get better? Did it get worse? Right? So yes, background samples need to be taken to where we know what starting point we're at.
Provide an application rate in barrels of the treated produced water that is irrigating the crop.
Yes, I believe that should be done.
Identify constraints associated with the proposed reuse activity.
So an example of that would be if you identify some sort of elevation change on that particular plot of land, then it may be necessary to put a berm on the lower side of that property. So in the event of a rainfall, we do not see runoff from that pilot project.
And then there's a whole slew of administrative considerations as well that are included. So you have referred to some of them. One is that the pilot study permit is only good for 1 year.
So that is correct. There is a provision within the LOA that it can be extended for an additional year.
Yes. If the activity is in good standing.
Yes.
And there's also quarterly monitoring. And again, the analyses have to be tendered to the NMED, and the NMED would have to disclose that in real time on their website.
Yes, and it is my understanding, and I would expect New Mexico to do the same thing. I believe Texas, I think I heard the description earlier today, for land sampling, they use what's referred to as a 5-spot. We have samples in each corner of the plot as well as one is in the center. That's also what you do once a quarter, as well as this chemical analysis of the raw and treated produced water once a quarter. I would expect the same here.
And sir, there's also a financial security.
Yep.
And I'm wondering if you could elaborate about that.
So that is caused some interesting discussions. Typically, when we look at financial security, we're talking to oil and gas companies that have generally deep pockets, or at least we like to believe they do. With these LOA processes and that letter of authority being issued to the landowner, then the landowner has to get assistance with getting that financial assurity. Typically, that's done through the technology provider he's working with, or the operator that's supplying the water for the project.
Yeah. So if the applicant wasn't a landowner here,
Yep.
But was someone like yourself,
Yep.
Select Water Solutions, and because you applied for an RFI, right?
Yep.
That's a yes, right?
Or, excuse me, we submitted information for the RFI. That wasn't an application process. It was a information gathering. Well, yes, we did reply a response to that.
And not only Select Water Solutions, but you yourself are the person.
I was the lead point for that project. Yes.
Okay. So let's say Select Water Solutions was applying
Yep.
for a permit.
Sorry. Yes.
Thank you. Was applying for a permit. Select Water Solutions would have to give some kind of financial security, and maybe that's for NMAD to discern the specific details, but financial security is definitely one of those things that should be included.
Yes, let me agree with that completely. Part of the image that this industry has faced from the past have been typically smaller companies that have walked away from project and left cleanups to the states to consider. And if the financial securities, they're not there to provide for that cleanup cost, then it's a cost to the state. And I'm not in favor of that. If, first of all, we intend to do no harm, but if we do harm, then it's up to us to clean it up.
And so we talked about quarterly and a final report at the end, correct?
That is correct. And there are certain time limits associated with all that, that within this certain period, you have to have that report back in.
Inspections.
Yep.
So that would also be a commitment on behalf of NMED to this body that they would in fact perform those inspections and then tender that information back to the Water Quality Commission. Is that also correct?
I believe that is correct as well.
In Texas, the pilot projects go right to the equivalent of our Water Quality Commission, the Railroad Commission, and there's no sort of in-between agency like the NMED, right?
So under the current guidelines now, that information goes straight back to the Railroad Commission. Not sure if there may be a division within the Railroad Commission that information would go to for review. I know the people that we're currently working with within the Railroad Commission that are kind of construing all this and working up the guidelines. At present, with this being an NMED process and the Water Quality Control Commission falling underneath the NMED, correct? Not under OCD. So that's the difference in Texas. Those projects are going to be handled by the oil regulator, whereas here they will be regulated by the environmental. At some point in the future, once we get past, if we get past that pilot phase for land application, there is a possibility that PCEQ could become involved with those larger applications. That is at least my understanding of the discussions between those two regulatory bodies.
And I think that the last thing that is required, and I would hope that you would also agree is necessary for a pilot project here, is the certification under oath by an individual, that an individual is responsible vis-a-vis whatever entity that applied for the permit.
I have no problem with that. I'm fully in favor of accountability. That's why projects such as, I've lost the acronym now, but some projects within the state require certification by a professional engineer.
Okay, so onto a different topic.
Madam Hearing Officer, is it possible to get a clarification